بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Respected ulama kiram and hufad kiram, elders and brothers, mothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's a very large gathering. There's a lot of brothers and youngsters here, inshallah. So if I can make a humble request that the brothers that are far in the back, since there's no more salah, if you can just kind of come forward more closer to the front, inshallah. So make some space. It'll be easy for you to also hear the talk and to be a little bit more participating in the gathering, inshallah. So tonight's lecture, tonight's discussion and talk, there's one where there's a round of controversy. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of talk. There are people on different sides. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of confusion. So tonight's talk, ideally I wanted to discuss on a different discussion, a different topic, but some of our teachers upstairs, they said that since our students are also going to be here, they're going to participate in this particular majma. There's a lot of youngsters, there's a lot of new crowd. We would like to know a little bit more about the information about this whole field, this gathering. This is our monthly gathering. This is an ijtima as well. And some of the topics that will be discussed, we want to know more about the haqiqat, the haysiyat, and the reality of it. And the topic of tonight, we're going to talk about the origin and the codification of tasawwuf, this word tasawwuf, the word the Sufi. So in the mind of an individual, because I've dealt with so many people, it can go in so many directions that it has a bad connotation. Sometimes you see some videos on YouTube, right? And then you have a good connotation. You read certain materials and sometimes a person thinks, and in the midst, there's all this confusion. So where did this all come from? What is the essence? What are we gathered here for tonight? What is the purpose? What is the foundation and the basis of this from the Islamic perspective? So we're going to start right in the beginning. Sheikh Sahab is also requesting again, inshallah, if the brothers can kind of come forward and make some space in case some other people are going to be coming in later. Whoever's in the back, inshallah, if you feel any free space, just come move closer and closer. This is also making amal upon the sunnah of the Sahaba as well. And that's where we're going to start off, inshallah. We're going to start off that when this ummah, when this world was steeped in darkness, when there was dalal, complete misguidance, and dhulmat, complete darkness in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to send forth some nur and some light to illuminate this world. And that illumination is in the embodiment of Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. He was the nur that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent into this very world. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam to spread the guidance, so from the very first generation, Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam, he has come forth with the Shari'at. Nabi Kareem alayhi came with the Holy Quran. Nabi Kareem alayhi came with the Mubarak Ahadith that we use as the formulation of this entire deen and this entire legacy and tradition of Islam. But along with that, Nabi Kareem alayhi came with some ruhaniyat and spirituality. And this is where we're going to start off with tonight's discussion. The very first people, the very first generation of Islam who acquired this ulum, and there's two types of ulum specifically that we're going to talk about, and both of them are very essentially necessary, dhururi. They are married to each other and they cannot be separated from one another. One is the zahiri ulum, the outward knowledge, the outward sciences. And this is where fiqh comes in, this is where our aqeedah and our belief comes in, this is where the ahadith of Nabi Kareem alayhi comes in, this is where the hifz and the memorization of Holy Quran comes in. This is the zahiri ulum that Nabi Kareem alayhi blessed this ummah with. But aside from that also, there's certain spiritual, ruhani, effulgence and fuyud the Nabi Kareem Aisam had brought with, that the Sahaba were the ones to inherit that as well. So they preserved the hadith of Nabi Kareem Aisam, they preserved the Holy Quran of Nabi Kareem Alayhi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They preserved all the ahkam of Sharia. But along with that, they also preserved the spirit. And the spirit is things that deal with the batin. The batin is on the inside. These are things that we don't normally speak of because they're internal. In one particular narration, and this is found in Bukhari, so it's a very, very authentic narration. The greatest rawi of hadith, Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, mentions and he narrates that I acquired from the Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam wiya'ain, two things, two receptacles of ilm and knowledge and ulum. As for one of these things that I have retained and memorized from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you know this very well. Bathathtuhu alaykum, I have mentioned this to you and I have spread this across the far regions of this world, far and wide. And that's why he's the biggest rawi of hadith. Those zahiri ulum and narrations I have spread far and wide. But the second one, he hasn't done so. He says, if I have to open that up to you, out of the fear of you not understanding it, you might cut my throat because you don't understand what I'm talking about. So that is a little bit more on the dangerous side of things. It's not something that everybody can handle. And that's why this type of batini ulum that is on the inside, it's so misunderstood. And it is very dangerous. And that's why there's so much controversy. So much wide, broad spectrum that you're going to see across the board. You mention the name Sufi to one person, he comes red on the face, he becomes angered that these are the mushriks, these are grave worshippers, these are the people that have turned Islam inside out. You mention another halaqah, subhanallah, gosh, I wish Allah subhanahu makes me one of them. How can it be so broad spectrum of difference of opinion? So tonight, inshallah, we're going to try to mention a little bit so that we get some understanding of this topic. So the Sahaba are the very, very first. They are, from the Khayr al-Qurun. In this particular book that I have before me, it's a beautiful book. Basically, the whole of this book encompasses this particular topic about the field of Tasawwuf. It's called Risalatul Qushayriya, but Alama Qushayri. It covers up from A to Z all of the elements, the basic elements of Tasawwuf with grounded knowledge and ilm. And he mentions right in the beginning that when this ulum had started out, the name has undergone different changes. So in the beginning, when we had the Sahaba, we have the companions, they acquired the Zahiri ulum, but they also acquired the Batini ulum, the internal spiritual knowledge from Nabi Kareem alayhi salam, but the name that was given to them. What was the name given to such people? As-Sahaba, As-Sahaba. Why this particular name? Amongst the Sahaba, there are Muftiyani Kiram, like Abdullah bin Mas'ud. There are Ubad and worshippers, right? There was many people, who were poets. There are many people who are like masters of the field of Aqidah. There are people who are masters of Hadith, like Abu Huraira. So why weren't they Muhaddithun and Fuqaha and Ulama al-Aqa'id? Why weren't they, all these other names that we give them? We turn away from every other single name and we only give them the name Sahabi, Sahabi, Sahabi. Because they said there was no other greater name to be given to them. There was no other greater feat and facet in their lives than the suhbah. And think about this. Imagine there are other people who were alive in that time. There were people who were alive in the time of Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam, but never met Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Could you imagine if we lived in that time? The Prophet of Allah alayhi salam is in our midst. There are those who are fortunate enough to go into the companionship and to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam face to face, person to person. What an honor, what a sharaf. And imagine how bad we would feel, how mahroom would we be, how deprived would we be if we lived in the same era, we lived in the same time, but Allah hadn't decreed or destined that we get this companionship in the suhbat of Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. That subhanallah. So this is what we're talking about, that Allah chose certain individuals in this time, in this era, to meet the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is that one thing that they cherish the most. That forget my ilm, forget my ulum, forget everything else. I met the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam person to person, face to face. So that's why they say that bas khalas, this one name is sufficient. Suhba, suhba, suhba. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this holy Quran that Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, all those of you who have iman, ittaqullah. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us and gives us this hukam. After fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keep the company. Kunu ma'a, ma'iyat. Keep the company and keep the suhbat of the sadiqeen. Because this is where something is going to rub off. So you have a relationship of a tutor and a mentor. This spirituality, this ruhaniyah, when you see somebody doing something, you learn from them. And this is an unspoken language. Just how a person drinks their water. The way that they walk, the way that they talk, the way that they behave with other people, this suhba rubs off on them, and they begin to see this and they become carbon copies of this. So the first 3 generations, when Nabi Kareem said that خَيْرُ قُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ, all of these first 3 generations, we can encapsulate all of them by the word suhba. You have the Sahaba, second generation tabi'un, the people who followed the Sahaba, and the tabi'in, those who followed the Sahaba. So the first 3 generations, the main term that we can use for them is the suhba, suhba, suhba. Companionship, companionship, companionship. And it was such a strong term that the ummah didn't use any other name for them but this name of suhba. This suhba, keep this in mind, is one of the very first requisites of this field of tasawwuf. How the Sahaba were companions and kept the companionship of Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. If anybody wants to be a Sufi of today, if anybody wants to be spiritually inclined of today, you cannot have this spiritual inclination, you cannot have this ruhaniyat without suhbah. All of the tariqas, all of the different avenues of ruhaniyat, of spirituality, when we talk about tazkiyah, when we talk about tasawwuf, you're going to find that there is a link and a silsila, a chain that goes back. And that chain, every particular sheikh that is alive today, he would have had a teacher, that same tutor and mentor relationship. That I learned this field of tazkiyah and tasawwuf from my sheikh, and his sheikh learned it from his sheikh, and his sheikh learned it from his sheikh, and this silsila continues and continues and goes right back to the Sahaba, to Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is one of the very first important points that we learn about tazkiyah and tasawwuf, that a person should take their tazkiyah and tasawwuf with a mustanad chain. What happened after that? Allama Qushayri mentions that after the first Khair al-Qurun, the particular name has shifted now. People then became known as az-Zuhad or az-Zahid. The very, very pious people, the cream of the crop, the person that is the true worshipper and abid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is, you can say, the most worshipful person in this ummah. There's certain titles given to them. No longer are they called Sahaba, no longer are they the Tabi'un or the Tabi'in. So the Ummah began to give them a new name now. And that's why I have these 2 books in front of me here. A lot of books began to start getting written in and around that time when the Tabi'un now are beginning to drift off. This is Kitab al-Zuhud by Imam Waqi ibn al-Jarrah. This is Kitab al-Zuhud by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Alive in the year, passed away in the year 197, passed away in the year 241. These are muhaddithun. Imam Waqi is Imam Shafi's ustad. Imam Ahmad is Imam Shafi's student. and they're writing books of ahadith and narrations talking about piety, taqwa, spirituality, ruhaniyat. So Kitabu Zuhud. This term became very popular in the society. When you see a pious man, a truly pious person, or a pious sister, the term that they refer to that person would be, this is a zahid. This is a zahid. Zuhud. This is now the first transition. What is a zuhud? Allama Qushayri mentions that lughatan, the dictionary definition of the word zuhud, ضد الرغبة. It's the opposite of inclination. We have raghba, we are inclined, we aspire, we desire things. In zuhud, to turn away, to dislike, to denounce, to renounce. And this is what a zahid is. Istilahi, the shortest istilahi and terminological definition that he gives is tarku rahat dunya. Tarku rahat dunya. A zahid is a person who leaves out, he forsakes the comforts and the luxuries of this world. For what purpose? Taliban li rahat al-akhirah. You leave all of the comforts of this world, all the luxuries, all the riches, all the fame, all the glitz, all the glamour. You leave whatever this world has to offer. For what? For the rahat, the peace, the sukoon, and the tranquility of the hereafter. And thus a person is known as a zahid. Now in that particular era that we're talking about, there are people that stood out, that had this ruhaniyat and spirituality. They would renounce this world, completely shun this world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this, I've mentioned to you before in the Holy Quran. This renunciation of this world is for the what purpose? Talaban li rahat al-akhirah. What does Allah mention about this? See, all of these things are founded in Quran, they are founded in the Hadith, but you have to kind of fit the pieces of the puzzle so you can see the clear picture. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that as for this dunya, right, this hayat al-dunya, what is this particular hayat al-dunya? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this particular hayat al-dunya, lahwun wa la'ib. The worldly life that we're experiencing day in and day out, it's nothing more than lahu wa la'ib. It's futility, it's futile, it's purposeless, it has no benefit in its play, it's not realistic. Right? As for وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةِ, as for the life and the abode of the hereafter, لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ, this life of the hereafter that we're working for and aspiring for, this is the true life. So two things are mentioned. Hayat ad-dunya, the verse mentions hayat ad-dunya, the word hayat. But then in the second verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't use the word hayat. He mentions that the life and the abode of the hereafter is al-hayawan. Those who understand the Arabic language, you know this is in the second verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses 5 terms of mubalagha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses 5 words of emphasis. Wa inna. Those who understand the Arabic language, this verse, if we only but understand it, it's giving us so much emphasis that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, turn away from this dunya. This dunya is nothing but just play and futility. Wa inna dar al-akhirah lahiya, and this la is for ta'keed, inna is for ta'keed. Then you have a dhamir al-fasl, lahiya al-hayawan, you have the third alif lam, and then you have alif noon za'idatan, which is for mubalagha. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to make us understand with every single possible grammatical emphasis that the world of the hereafter, this is what you need to strive for, this is what you need to push for, this is what a person should aim for and target. So once the people understood that subhanAllah, what am I wasting my life for? Some of the hadith of Nabi Kareem alayhi to make us understand that what is this zuhud? What is this zuhud? In one hadith, Nabi Kareem mentions, ad-dunya mal'una. Ad-dunya mal'una. This world that we are living in, this particular life that we are existing in, all of this day-to-day 24/7 that we have in our daily lives, from the first day that we are born until the very last breath that we breathe, all of it is mal'una, it is cursed, it is cursed, it is cursed. Ad-dunya mal'una, mal'unun ma fiha. This world is cursed. Everything that is in this world is cursed. And what does this mean to be cursed? Cursed, cursed. What is this la'na? What is this curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Fuqaha, ulama, they mentioned that al-la'na and bu'd an rahmatillah, to be far removed from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not going to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with whatever the contents of this world or this dunya are pushing towards you. Whatever it tries to lure you in, it's not going to get you closer to the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's going to move you further and further and further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then the hadith mentions except four things. Except four things. الدنيا ملعونة ملعون ما فيها إلا ذكر الله. One thing is not accursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One thing is not going to distance you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this dunya, when we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا وَالَاهُ, anything closely related to the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like gatherings like we have here tonight. People who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things that are closely related to the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those things are not accursed. And finally, أو عالم أو متعلم, a scholar who understands truly this religion inside and out, أو متعلم, or a student, a dedicated, righteous student who's trying to learn this deen. Aside from these four things, the rest of this world is cursed. So we need to spend our 24-hour day in life in one of these four avenues. Find some way to make the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our daily salah, reciting Holy Quran, grabbing our tasbih, doing different types of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being around those people that remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or undertaking ilm and knowledge, sitting by the scholars, sitting with the ulama and becoming a student of deen. If we don't do any of these things, then we're going to fall into the trap on the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So coming back to the point at hand, a zahid, a person who renounces this world. So the next generation of people, all these books are written about in the hadith that enumerate their virtues, talks about the zahid. Now part of the renunciation, and this is the next part that kind of comes in, is part when these people, the subsequent generation after the tabi'un and the tabi'in, when they renounced this world, they renounced every rahat, every luxury, right? Any kind of benefit that they could get from this world, they turned away from it. Part and parcel of that was that when they would wear their clothes, nowadays we have these fine cotton materials. For the sisters, they have that smooth, silky material. You have the polyester, you have the nice, smooth cotton. So much comfort and luxury. In the age of the Zahideen, those people that renounce this world, what they began to do is they began to wear a woolen clothing, wool, suf. They would begin to wear wool. That I was not born, I was not created to follow the luxuries of this world. When everybody else is dressing up fine and smooth and silky and all of these things, trying to acquire all the luxuries of this world, the Zahideen are like, you're wasting your time. We weren't created for this. We were created for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't need to work and enslave myself to earn money to buy these fancy clothes. In our day's terminology, I don't need to work myself to death just to drive a fancy car, just to have a big house, just so that I can come dressed in beautiful, beautiful adorned clothing. My real purpose and maqsad in this life is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, He's going to clothe me with the libas of Jannah. But if I forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to put on these beautiful clothes in this dunya, what if in the aspiration to acquire all these clothes of this dunya, if I forget my Allah, what if I miss out my libas of Jannah? So they were smart and they were intelligent. That's how the name then began to come on. When all of these pious people, the world's most pious people, the Ruhani people, filled with the spirituality, acquired from Nabi Kareem alayhi salam through all of their mentors, they began to adopt a suf, the woolen cloak. That's where the name comes in. Tasawwafa fulan, wa tasawwafa fulan, wa tasawwafa fulan. Muhammad tasawwafa, he has donned the cloak. Zayd, tasawwafa, he has donned the cloak. Bakr, tasawwafa. In the Arabic language, this is not a normal word. Those who know sarf in Arabic, nahu, and grammar, it comes from the word suf, right? Suf, which means wool. So tasawwuf would mean to don on. Like for example, takhaffafa. When a person puts on a khuf, you put on your mozas, your socks. Takhaffafa zaydun, right? When you put on something, so when they put on this particular shawl or this particular clothing, this is now, in this particular era, when people became famous and popular, and they started to look alike, this is where some of the problem began to start. So the original term of a Sufi, this word ya, Sufi, it's a nisbat. Like we have Pakistani, Afghani, Shafi'i, Hanafi, this ya is for a nisbat. So a Sufi would be a person who wears woolen clothing because he's a Zahid, because he's renouncing this world. When people after people after people, the most pious people began to all look alike, what did you begin to have after that? You had the people now, they were the crooks, they were the fraudsters, they were the deceivers. They weren't Zahid, they weren't renouncers of this dunya, but they began to see that, subhanAllah, they're getting so much respect. This Sufi is getting so much respect when he walks down the street, despite owning nothing, despite being so poor. Everybody's opening the sidewalk so the person can walk through. When he comes in the masjid and says Allahu Akbar, all the eyes are on the Sufi. So they demanded respect, and Allah gave them izzah and respect in this very world. Why? Because they were true mukhlis, sincere abids of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when other people began to see this, I want some of that respect. So they also now put on the cloak. They also began to dress. They put on the suf. They weren't the real. They weren't the real deal. They're actors. They're deceivers. And they used to make up certain kind of gimmicks and certain kind of tricks that, you know what? There's a specific story also. It's mentioned in our books that there was three. They had a habit of stealing and robbing and thieving and so forth and duping. So he said, we're going to go to this particular town, we're going to go to this particular city. So there's two of you and there's one of me. So whose turn is it to be the Sheikh today? He's like, okay, you be the Sheikh and we'll be the two murids and the disciples that are coming after you. So when they kind of come into the particular town, this is a gimmick. This is a game that they're playing. And they put off onto the people as if we're so pious. Now the people, they begin to see that, oh, there's a big Sheikh over here. And they begin to have like a majma and a following and a lot of people. The effect that wound up happening is that there was a lot of disciples that began to follow a fake sheikh. A fake sheikh. And the disciples were very sincere. We want to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these disciples, and this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's fadl and karam, because of their ikhlas, because of their sincerity, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? See, when we're sincere, Allah's still going to guide you. So these disciples and these murids, because of their sincerity, the Shaykh would tell them, do this dhikr, do that dhikr, do this ibadah, do that ibadah, and these disciples would do it, and they would do it, and they would do it, until they became so pious and so righteous and so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One particular day, they're sitting there and they're meditating, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is spirituality, we can't talk some of these things because we won't understand them. But in a spiritual way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives ilham. Ilham is an inspiration. So these particular disciples, they confronted the Shaykh, that, oh Shaykh, and then they're saying that, you know what, our Shaykh is so high up there that when we are in our focus and our meditation, we can see and we have an understanding the piety of the other people in our era, in our zamana. But Allahu Akbar, our Shaykh is so high up there, we can't find him on the radar. He's not on the radar. He's not showing up. So he says, we have to go confront the Shaykh about this thing. So they come to the Shaykh and they say, Shaykh, we do our muraqabah, we do our meditation, and we can see the levels of the other people, subhanallah, but you are off the scales. You're off the charts. We can't find you anywhere. What did the Shaykh say at that time? See the effect of suhbat. This was a fraudster, this was a deviant, this was a deceiver, and he tried to play a trick. But staying in the mahol of the pious murids also, who had this ikhlas and the sincerity, and spending time with them and their ikhlas and their sincerity begins to rub off on the Sheikh. After a while the Sheikh says, okay, truth be told, I'm not really a Sheikh. I'm a dupe, I'm a cheat, I'm a deceiver. And then the murids are like, what are you saying? This cannot be. This cannot be. So then all of these disciples, these pious murids, and they begin to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that at that particular moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted their dua in favor of the Sheikh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated the maqam of a fake Sheikh into a real Sheikh. He says, now you are registering and we can see your maqam. Allahu Akbar. So this is one of those particular stories, but the moral of the story, this suhbah, this companionship, and also how you have these fake Sufis. We call them pseudo-Sufis, fictitious Sufis. And that's where you get such a huge diversion and such a controversy across the board. Imam Malik, it has been attributed to Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala that two things were necessary. Based upon the hadith that I mentioned earlier, Zikrullahi wa ma walahu aw alimun aw muta'allimun. This ilm and dhikr and ilm and dhikr, they have to go together hand in hand. If any one of these two are missing, we're going to have problems. This particular statement, Allama Qushayri mentions also, it's been mentioned elsewhere also, it's attributed to Imam Malik rahimahullah. Others, they say it wasn't Imam Malik's statement, it's Allama Dasuqi's statement. But what is that statement? That's important for us to understand, and this word tasawwuf comes in there also. This word tasawwuf, when was it first used? Who was it attributed to? Where did it come about from? So this particular statement, if it's truly attributed to Imam Malik, then go into his century also. He mentions, supposedly mentions, if not him, Allama Dasuqi, Man tasawwafa walam yatafaqqah. Whoever follows the path of tasawwuf, whoever gets involved in these spiritual exercises, making the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meditating in different muraqabat, reciting Quran in a specific with a regiment and so forth. Man tasawwafa, whoever adopts the path of tasawwuf, walam yatafaqqah, but he didn't couple that with fiqh. He learned the batini uloom, but he didn't learn the zahiri uloom of sharia. Faqad tazandaqa. This person, he is going to go on the path towards atheism. Towards atheism. And that's why we find so many people, you'll find YouTube videos, you'll find a lot of kalam against the Sufis. These are those people who are either the fake Sufis or who haven't understood it and didn't balance it off with ilm. And they wind up saying such things that are against Islam itself. From our back home countries, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in India, we've heard all the stories. I used to hear it from my mom, I used to hear it from my uncles, that there used to be such shuyukh starting to claim and make statements that you don't need to pray namaz anymore. I don't need to pray namaz anymore. I'm always in the dhikr of Allah. As if salah is only for the beginner. Once you get to my level, you don't need to pray anymore because we have reached that maqam. We're always remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is pure jahala. This is tazandaqa. This is turning towards atheism. Quran says aqimus salah, and you're saying I don't need to establish salah. Now this type of tasawwuf, without that tafaqquh, is going to take you out of the fold of Islam. And rightfully so. Those types of people, tasawwuf has nothing to do with those types of people. So Imam Malik comes back, Man tasawwafa wa lam yatafaqqah faqad tazandaqa. And on the flip side, a lot of us think that what we're going to do is that we're going to study only zahiri ulum. We're only going to study Quran, we're only going to study Hadith, we're only going to study fiqh, and we're going to have nothing to do with this ruhaniyat, we're going to have nothing to do with this tasawwuf. There's a danger there as well. In this particular statement, Imam Malik mentions, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَمَنْ تَفَقَّهَ. Whoever adopts the path of fiqh, the dry fiqh, just zahiri fiqh, وَلَمْ يَتَسَوَّفْ, and he doesn't turn towards spirituality and ruhaniyat, فَقَدْ تَفَسَّقَ. This person will become a fasiq. This person will become a fasiq, an open transgressor of sharia. He will know the Quran, he'll memorize the Quran, but he's going to act contrary to it. How many have we seen great researchers, Yani they'll memorize Quran and Hadith and give you lectures upon lectures upon lectures, but you will not see any sign of ruhaniyat or spirituality. They will not have any idea of ruhaniyat within them. So many Orientalists who aren't even Muslims, they would know the deen of Islam outwardly, zahiran, but batinan, there is no ruh, there's no spirituality. So that's now beginning where this ism and this name of Tasawwuf begins to kind of come in. I have to conclude now because my time is winding up. In short, also in this particular field of Tasawwuf, as we're kind of coming in, it starts off with suhbah. We need to have, if a person wants to be a Sufi of this particular day and age, first and foremost, the same criteria mentioned earlier, suhbah. We cannot have the suhbah of Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. That moqa, that opportunity is gone. We cannot have the suhbah of the Sahaba. We can't have the suhbah of the tabi'un. The thing that we can have, in order for our tasawwuf to be valid, in order for our tasawwuf to be accurate, we need to get into that particular silsila that leads back up to Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. So the shuyukh that we try to get the tasawwuf from, they should be in a respectable, yani in a validated silsila going back to Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam. Number two, az-zahideen, the next generation of people, or the zuhad, the people that renounce this world. We cannot be a Sufi of this day but be inclined to the world. We have to turn away from this dunya and all of its luxuries, but maybe not to the level of those zuhad of the past. They really renounce the entirety of this dunya. To this day and age, enough of this dunya we need to renounce that we are punctual upon our 5 daily prayers, that we fast in the month of Ramadan, that we go for Hajj, that we pay our zakah. Enough, sufficient, it suffices for us to do our faraid and wajibat. That's enough of a renunciation of this world for us in this day and age. And this tasawwuf, what is this tasawwuf? Yani this is that kathratul ibadah. Engage our time, our spare time in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa ma walahu ilm and ta'allum. Continuing from there, the final thing that I want to address and discuss is the final element. Nabi Kareem mentions that Addabani Rabbi, my Rabb has taught me adab. My Rabb, my Lord, my Allah has taught me adab, akhlaq, wa ahsana ta'dibi. He's beautified my adab. And the final element that exists within the life of a Sufi is adab. Great akhlaq. The people who have the greatest akhlaq, they are the ones that are known as the Sufis. They will always give preference to other people over themselves, and this is also highlighted in the lives of the Sahaba. This is also what they learned from Nabi Kareem alayhi salatu wasalam, to sacrifice your needs, your desires, your wants for the needs and the desires and the wants of everybody else. That's why Allah mentions وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. They would give preference to other people over themselves, even if they were in dire need. And the Sufi, this is what he would beautify himself with. Preference to everybody else, everything else over myself. And this particular thing, when we have these 4 things, then there's some hope, inshallah, that we may gain some of this element of tasawwuf. I'm going to mention only 2 things from this particular book. This was a brief synopsis of how this complete controversy has come up with this name Tasawwuf, Sufis and so forth. One more thing I actually do need to mention, khususan for the students and the sisters sitting upstairs, that you are going to find in this day and age in history as well about some of the practices. You might not understand these practices of the Ahl Tasawwuf, of the Sufiya. What are these practices? I remember when I was still very young, that time my Sheikh was still alive, rahimahullah ta'ala, and some of the things that he would advise us to do, I didn't understand it. I understand the dhikr of Allah, but the specific ways of doing things, as still a student of religion, zahiran, and I didn't understand some of the spiritual aspects, but in due time, it becomes, if a person is dedicated and sincere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you an understanding of it. What I'm talking about is this different form of adhkar, in their terminology, riyadat, spiritual exercises. What you're going to find, those of you who are going to do research in this field, you'll find that there's a lot of tashabbuh, even with the kuffar. You have the Hindus. They have their pundits and they have their other kind of people, and they make their zikr and azkar without to their idols and butts and so forth. You have the Buddhists. They also meditate, outwardly doing very austere spiritual exercises. So you have so many different things. And then you have also the Sufis, and sometimes there seems to be a commingling, and that also gives the Tasawwuf a bad name. That what is this kind of activities that you people are doing? Where is this in the Sunnah? Did the Sahaba used to do this? Did Nabi Kareem used to do this? And the truth is no. Some of us, we need to understand this, because I have spoken to some of our brothers who are in the field of Tasawwuf. They too are mistaken about this. If you say, for example, in Ghar Hira, Nabi Kareem went there and he went for isolation, right? He went for isolation. And then to make the statement that in that isolation that Nabi Kareem did this muraqabah and that muraqabah, this is an attribution, we cannot say any of those things. It's a very, very dangerous hadith. Nabi Kareem mentions, Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan, whoever ascribes and attributes a lie against me, فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ, he should get his abode ready, his house ready in the fire of Jahannam. So we cannot say anything of those things. We cannot say for sure. We can't say that when the Sahaba were there and they're seated so silently as if birds can perch on their necks, that they were making the same muraqabah that we're making. This is unfactual, unfounded, baseless statements that we're making, and this is a thing that's pushing the people away from Tasawwuf. That you people are attributing lies, you people are liars, you people are frauds, you people are fake. But that doesn't mean that this type of exercises, spiritual exercises, are unfounded. So how do we tie the two together? Sahaba never used to do it. Rasulullah used to never do it. But the issue is that Rasulullah never forbade it either. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Nabi Kareem mentioned certain ayat, وَذْكُرُ اللَّهَ ذِكْرًا كَثِيرًا, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly. In the field of usul, when it comes to extracting ayat and verses of Quran, these kind of things, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it mutlaqan, there's no qaid, there's no restriction on how to do it. You can remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala however you wish. It wasn't restricted to a specific form. It wasn't restricted to a specific way. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly. One particular hadith, Nabi Kareem mentions that اذكر الله حتى يقال مجنون. How much zikr am I supposed to do? How much am I supposed to remember Allah? Remember Allah so much that people call you crazy. This guy's majnoon, this guy's mad. All the time, Allah, Allah, Allah. What is this? Allah, Allah, Allah walking, Allah sitting, Allah lying down, Allah this way, Allah that way. اذكر الله حتى يقال مجنون. That's how much Rasulullah wants you to make dhikr. But coming back to the point at hand, where these exercises came about from, the bunyad, and this is more for the students upstairs, our students who are studying fiqh, our students who understand some of the elements when it comes to usul of sharia. The foundation of these practices is not ibadah. Those who are in the field of tasawwuf also understand this, that when we do some of our spiritual exercises, we're not doing it as an ibadah. Because then you could say that you are introducing a new form of worship in Islam that wasn't there before, and thus it becomes a textbook definition of bid'ah. So we are not saying we are doing this as an ibadah. The foundational practices of this tasawwuf is based upon tib and tajruba. Tib, medicine. How does medicine work? How did humanity understand medicine? Through experience. Experience. I'm going to have to conclude soon because the note is here, so we'll conclude on this particular point, that since it's based upon tajruba and experience, it's not going to come unto the da'ira of ibadah and worship. The mashayikh, that same suhbat, that tutorship and that mentorship, we have experienced when we do these particular things, it gives this end effect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us the end outcome. قَدْ أَفْلَهَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, the person who has purified his nafs, he has found falah and success. How are we going to do the tazkiyah? Then the shuyukh and the mashayikh, through their tajriba and experience, just the same as a psychologist would today, they would prescribe certain things. If you do this, you will get humbleness, tawadu, and humility. If you do this, you're going to have a more feeling of khushu and khudu in your prayer. So it's based upon the foundations of tajriba. With that, I hope, inshallah, we've explained enough. There's so much more to discuss, inshallah, but the time is short. May Allah give us the tawfiq to understand. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakallah.